If you watched my first video, you saw me make index cards, file folders into specimen cards using embossing folders, gilding wax, and napkins. Part 2 here with a few more different ideas for making some interesting pieces for our journals. Today we'll use tickets, tiny specimens to use as dangles, embossing folders, and gilding wax to make those embossing folders stand out and show our specimens off, along with the flip-out, flip-up type specimen card. Hi everyone, Patty here. Let's mass make some I put the transparency piece in before I fixed the end to have something to glue to. The part that ripped off says ticket, and I cut it out while the file folder was folded, so I have two pieces that say ticket now that I can use. I also purchased a digital from Louisa Heinzel on Etsy that are tickets. Honestly, I love these tickets and the little sayings they have on them, so I glued one of those on one side of the specimen card and the piece that comes out of the ticket die cut on the other side. I keep checking to see how to make this little collage of tickets on the side of this card work. I ink the edges after I've decided which ticket I'm going to use and how to place them. I ended up gluing a plain blue ticket to the back side. The edges didn't meet on the tickets, so I trimmed the edges to get them to be the same size. I used the frame part of the ticket die cut to put around the tickets, and this finished off the edges nicely. Wouldn't these be fun to give away on a garden tour? Don't forget to ink those edges to bring everything together and no white edges showing. Let's ink those edges. Now to make two tiny specimen cards. I will use these for dangles on my journal pages. The cardstock I used to cut them is tea-dyed and it has a leaf imprint on them. I won't be doing too much decorating because the hand-dyed cardstock is so pretty. The transparencies really get a lot of lint on the pieces. I try to wipe it off with a baby wipe, but that seems to add more lint. I have a couple tiny feverfew flowers that I have dried to use in these little cuties. Leaving the stem on the tiny flowers helped with placing the flower in the center of the transparency pieces. We can always cut the stem off when we get it all glued together. A little bead of glue around the edges of the transparency and the cardstock to glue the two pieces together. Wipe off any excess glue around the edges. I decided to make two of these little cuties, and the second one I added a crackle stamp around the edge and a few other stamps with numbers from my Tim Holtz Field Notes collection. Make sure you use clamps to hold the pieces together or place under a book to keep the pieces together tightly so you don't end up with your specimen falling out. Now for a typical rectangle specimen card, but I think the Martha Stewart geranium that I pressed is really pretty. I also pressed a stem with a bud and a leaf. This is a true specimen card, as I listed the type and color so I could purchase this one again next year. I arranged the flower with the stem and the bud and the leaf in a pleasing way. I'm leaving the card very generic until I know where and which journal I will add it to. I can always come back and add some stamping or a cluster to the side of it. Again, the lint that accumulates on the transparencies. I try to get the pieces as clean as possible before I glue them together. Look at this beautiful geranium. The color is just vibrant. Glue your transparencies onto your card and put under a book to dry. Now for a mini rose that I picked from my roses while it was still just a bud. I have several growing at the front of my house. This is a picture of my roses growing. The napkin I used in a specimen card in part 1. I used it to fussy cut a little piece to add to the corner of this card with a little butterfly. I inked the edges to give it some definition around the fussy cut pieces and the whole specimen card. For some reason, I didn't get the process video on this one, but I used a 3D embossing folder with a doily impression from Sisik's Tim Holtz Texture Fades, and then I added some gilding wax from Art Alchemy in black gold. That really set the yellow mini rose off, I thought. I think I show this napkin in both videos. I left an edge with the rough trim on one side, added a few stickers onto the book text portion, and a little cluster of the fussy cut pieces from this napkin. This specimen will be with Baby Tears fern that I grew last year and pressed. I used another piece of my hand-dyed papers. This one was dyed with my handmade ink, and I just love the look of it. Had to decide which side I like better to be the outside of the specimen card. I add a little glue around the edge and glue the transparency down to the hand-dyed cardstock. Add my specimen to the wiped off transparency and arrange the specimen where it fits the best in the opening. Add more glue around the edge and glue another piece of the transparency. I decided to add some stamping. It's best to do this before you glue your transparency into the opening, or you could get ink onto the transparency. I use a piece of paper to mask off the transparency and added a few stamps. Set under a book to dry flat. This will be a small specimen with a wide bottom margin, so we can add a few extra stamps on the bottom. I have another hand-dyed piece of cardstock, and I add a little distress ink to all of the edges and the center hole. I used a square hole punch to punch this hole out of the top of this folded piece of cardstock. I put it more to the top of the paper versus the center. I add my transparencies and a little blue flocks to the center. I have 2 dried flocks, so I stack them so you could see the brightest color on both sides of the specimen card. You can always trim off any excess transparency if it sticks out over the edge of your specimen card. Stamp a few numbers and file. This one's done. I will be using a red leaf from a dogwood tree that my mom has growing in her yard. The dogwood is such a pretty tree, and the leaves are gorgeous when they start turning colors in the fall. This leaf has kept its color without doing any type of treatment on it. I'm going to take it to the big shot, emboss a scroll pattern on a corner edge. This embossing folder is a corner, but it hits my specimen card on 3 sides. I ink around the edges and the center circle with my distressing ink in walnut. I used a little gilding wax and red flame from Art Alchemy. I thought the red would look good with the red leaf. The finger tool works great in and around the embossed swirl pattern. I put this metallic wax on both sides of the specimen card. Glue my transparency down after wiping off any lint on them. Add my leaf, and glue the other piece of the transparency, sandwiching the leaf in between the 2 pieces of transparency. Add a little more glue around the edge and make sure all of the edges are pressed down. I added a little more distress ink and walnut on top of the metallic wax to cut down on the shine and give the specimen card a more aged look, spending more time on adding the ink around the edges. I thought a little collage of pieces would look great on this one, so I rounded up a few pieces and collaged them in a pattern on the corner of the specimen card, and it's ready to go sit under a book to dry flat. This one I have a heuchera or coral bells. It's another don't do like I do, but do like I say. I added a circle cut in the top portion of the cardstock, and then I cut out a smaller piece of the textbook page to go around the outside. I wish I would have put the textbook page in between the transparencies, so you could see the textbook page on both sides of the specimen card, because textbook pages have printing on both sides, so you would have seen it on both sides. I like this idea, and we'll have to make another one with the textbook page in the inside of the transparency so it can be seen on both sides. The textbook gave this dark leaf something to make it stand out and show off a little bit better. Ink around the edges of both the specimen card and the textbook page circle. Glue your transparencies and specimen into your card. Glue the two pieces together and let dry under a book to dry flat. I have more of the napkin that I had fussy cut and a little cheesecloth along with Tim Holt's ideology, an eclectic collection of printed memorabilia, which is small and tiny pieces of ephemera that fit nicely on these smaller clusters. For our pansy specimen, I have two pansies that I glued back to back, so the pretty side is facing forward on both sides of this specimen card. They aren't the same size or the same color, but the little difference is what makes this card unique. Glue your transparencies onto the specimen card on one side and sandwich your double-sided pansy to the transparency. Glue both sides together. I left this one very neutral. Only the tea-dyed paper is showing with inked edges. I can always go back and add a little cluster or something at a later date when I know where I will be using it. I add a little drop of glue to hold the two pansies together. Let dry under a book to dry flat. Our hops specimen card with a seed pod. I grew hops in a container, which I did correctly as they can be very invasive, but it filled my container completely and it was going everywhere when the seeds started sprouting up all over. I decided to take it out, but before I did, I made a specimen card with the leaf and the seed pod. I tried to give the dried leaf and pod a little color with my Distress Oxide ink and spun sugar. But that didn't really work. The pod and the leaves didn't really soak up any of the color. So you don't even need to try that. I did add the excess to my hand-dyed cardstock, which did give it a little hint of pink color. I do like that. This piece of dried cardstock has tiny flowers in the corner, and I cut the cardstock so I could keep them up in the corner and you could see them through the transparencies. I'm having so much fun dyeing paper with my handmade inks, and will be putting some on my Etsy site, both the originals and digital prints. The pink didn't work on the seed heads, but I tried a little forest moss on the leaf. Can't really see that either. Glue your transparencies with the specimen sandwiched between the two layers and let dry under a book till flat. Another flip-up specimen card with bleeding heart. I have a variety that has lime green leaves. It's just gorgeous. I dried a whole piece of the flowers going from tiny to large flowers. I want to bend it around the rust piece I have on this piece of cardstock. This took a little work to get it to bend and stay in place while I tried to glue it down. I love this piece of dyed paper, and you need to go check out what will be going on my Etsy site for original pieces and digital. Glue your pieces together on the opening of the fold-out specimen card. Wipe off any excess glue. Arrange the specimen onto the transparency and add a few drops of glue to help hold the larger specimen in place while you manipulate it to go into an arch shape. One of the flowers popped off, so I just glued it back into place. I can't even tell which one it is now that it is dry. I used clamps to hold the stem in place, adjusted where I needed to get the specimen in between the transparencies, and added any extra glue to hold down the piece. You might want to let this top piece dry before you take the clamps off and add the other piece of transparency on top of this. Glue both pieces down and re-clamp the stem. Weigh down the parts that won't fit with the clamp. I have a spray bottle full of water. I'm using that to hold down the top portion of the transparencies. I show making the napkin specimen card in another video. We'll find that and link it in the description. I hope I gave you some ideas on making some specimen cards, on what to do and what not to do. I know I sure had fun making them. Have a great day. Bye.